Okay, so let's just imagine for a second. It's the middle of the night, 9th century Iceland. A blizzard is absolutely raging outside. And inside this low, long building made of literal earth and grass, a whole family is huddled together in this thick, smoky darkness. We're going to dig into how the famous Viking longhouse was, well, less of a cozy home and more of a brilliant and frankly dangerous machine for survival.
And that, right there, is the huge question we're tackling today. I mean, these were some of the most sophisticated sailors the world had ever seen. They could cross the open Atlantic. So why on earth did they choose to live for months at a time in what was, for all intents and purposes, a toxic box?
Just how toxic are we talking here? Well, get this. Modern experiments recreating these conditions found that the air inside had up to 136 times the level of dangerous fine particulate matter that the World Health Organization says is safe. 136!
Yeah, to put it another way, if you brought a building inspector from today back in time, they would condemn the place on the spot. I mean, sources literally call it a semi-sealed toxic enclosure. By our standards, it was legally unfit for people to live in. A home designed to slowly poison you.
But here's the thing. This was no accident. And it wasn't because they didn't know any better. The real answer is so much more interesting. It was a choice. A very deliberate, calculated life-or-death trade-off made by people who knew exactly what the stakes were.
So to really get why they'd make a choice like that, you first have to understand the real enemy they were up against. And it wasn't the smoke, it wasn't just about being uncomfortable, it was about the lethal, relentless cold that was always trying to get in.
We gotta remember, the Viking Age was a colder time than ours. On average, the winters were about 2 degrees Celsius colder. Now that might not sound like a huge deal to us, but in a world without thermostats and central heating, that is absolutely the difference between making it through the winter and not.
And this is really the key. For a Viking family, if your shelter had a design flaw, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It didn't just mean you had a drafty cold night. It meant there was a very real chance your entire family, your entire bloodline, would not live to see the spring. You couldn't get the engineering wrong.
So what was their solution? The longhouse. But we need to get this image of a primitive hut out of our heads and start seeing the longhouse for what it really was, a sophisticated thermal engine. It was an engineered ecosystem designed to do one thing and one thing only: generate and hoard heat.
So part one of this engine was the house itself. The walls, especially in a place like Iceland with very few trees, were built from these huge 2-meter-thick blocks of turf. Now, this is more than just insulation. It's what engineers call high-mass construction. Those walls acted like a giant thermal battery, soaking up any heat during the day and then slowly radiating it back into the home all through the coldest parts of the night.
But, a battery needs a power source to charge it, right? And this is where the genius comes in. The real power plant of the longhouse wasn't the central fire. It was a biological furnace, the farm animals that they brought inside to live with them all winter long.
And you can see just how insane the difference is on this chart. Okay, so a person just sitting around gives off about 100 watts of heat, like an old light bulb. But one single cow, a cow generates a staggering 1,600 watts of heat, non-stop. That is 16 times more heat than a person. So when you do the math for a standard longhouse, maybe a couple of cows, a few sheep, the total heat coming off just the animals was about 10,000 watts. To put that in perspective, that is the same as running 10 modern electric space heaters 24/7 all winter long for free, powered by hay.
Okay, and this brings us right back to that smoke-filled room. Because the very design that was so incredibly brilliant at trapping all that wonderful animal heat was also incredibly brilliant at trapping something else: every single toxic particle from the fire and the animals themselves. So you're probably thinking, why not just build a chimney? Problem solved. Well, to a Viking engineer, a chimney would have been a disaster. In thermodynamics, they would call it catastrophic heat loss. It's basically a giant straw, sucking all of that precious, life-saving warmth straight out of the house, making their biological furnace totally useless.
And this slide just lays out the dilemma perfectly. It was a brutal, binary choice. Option 1, you build a chimney for ventilation. You get to breathe clean air, but you and your entire family and all your animals will probably freeze to death. Option 2, no chimney. You trap the heat and stay alive, but you have to breathe poisonous air all winter. They chose to stay alive.
And we can actually put a number on this poison. During cooking times, the carbon monoxide levels in a longhouse could shoot up to around 22 parts per million. The modern safe exposure limit is about 6. They were living with nearly 4 times the poison in their air that we would consider safe.
So what was the price they paid for making that trade-off? Well, skeletal remains tell the story. It looks like they suffered from chronic health issues, things like reduced lung capacity, and almost certainly shorter lifespans. That was the cost of making it to the next summer.
But the engineering didn't just stop at the front door. Their entire strategy for surviving winter was a multi-layered system. Everything had to work together to hold the cold back.
So you've got this whole integrated system, right? Layer 1 is the house itself, the thermal battery. Layer 2 is the animals inside, the biological furnace. But then there was a critical third layer, what you could call personal, portable microclimates.
This was their last line of defense. The families slept up on these raised wooden platforms, which kept them off the frozen ground. And they bundled up in layers of wool and, if they had the means, absolutely incredible amounts of down feathers.
And this number, this is just wild. In the famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway, archaeologists found nearly 70 pounds of down feathers. 70 pounds! That is enough down to fill 31 high-end modern king-size duvets. This wasn't about being fancy, this was a technological mastery of insulation. They were experts at trapping body heat. So when you put all these pieces together, it paints a very different picture. The Vikings didn't just tough out the winter with brute force and endurance. No. They survived because of strategic, intelligent engineering. They saw winter as an enemy that you had to outthink.
So, really, we need to update our view of them. The old picture is of these hardy warriors who just kind of endured the cold. The new, much more accurate picture is of strategic engineers who actively outsmarted the cold. They built a whole system combining architecture, biology, and personal tech to win.
So the next time you just casually adjust your thermostat, think about the longhouse. And remember that for them, being warm wasn't a comfort. It was a daily struggle. For them, warmth was a victory. And the smoke they breathed was just the price they were willing to pay to win it.